Two modern Star Trek shows faced exactly the same criticism, but had opposite solutions. Two Star Trek shows of the modern era faced exactly the same criticism when they started, but ultimately succeeded with completely opposite solutions. Star Trek Discovery faced the challenge of competing for attention with prestige television shows that often eschewed values like hope and optimism. In response, Star Trek Discovery tried taking a realistic approach to the Star Trek, the original series era. Discovery Season 1 focused on Michael Burnham's, Sonequa Martin Green, mutinous part in igniting the Klingon Federation War, and also took the USS Discovery crew to the fascist nightmare of Star Trek's mirror universe. Discovery Season 2 featured Starfleet's morally gray Covert Ops Division, Section 31. Star Trek Picard reintroduced Admiral Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, long after the end of Star Trek The Next Generation. Audiences had been assured, or perhaps warned, that Picard was not going to be a continuation of TNG, but a character study of Admiral Picard in his twilight years. We were instead treated to a bleak take on Star Trek, where Earth was no longer Star Trek's paradise. Star Trek Picard's version of Starfleet was selfish, insular, and corrupted from within. Commander Raffi Musiker, Michelle Hurd, dealt with family estrangement and substance abuse. Xenophobia against Romulans and ex-Borg ran rampant. Something was off in these Star Trek shows. Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard were both criticized for being too dark. Both Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard were criticized for being too dark, and with good reason. Star Trek Discovery Season 1 went all in on extrapolating just how brutal Star Trek's mirror universe and Klingon War storylines could realistically be. While Star Trek Discovery grappled with how to be Star Trek amid the popularity of grittier television shows, Picard contended with inevitable comparisons to Star Trek The Next Generation. To differentiate itself from TNG, Star Trek Picard steeped itself in despair. Neither show shied away from graphic depictions of murder, torture, sexual assault, animal cruelty, war crimes, or Star Trek's first F-bombs, just to name a few. Criticisms of the tone in both Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard were valid. Streaming allowed Star Trek to take a gloves-off approach to topics that had previously only been alluded to in the name of realism. Earlier iterations of the franchise weren't often as explicit as Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard were in their first seasons. This new Star Trek had all the right superficial ingredients: starships, familiar aliens, moral quandaries, and complex questions. But both new Star Trek shows seemed to be missing Gene Roddenberry's optimism that had always been integral to Star Trek. Fortunately, that would change, but in very different ways. Star Trek Picard became lighter by bringing back the original TNG cast in Season 3. Star Trek Picard Season 3 became lighter with a Star Trek The Next Generation original cast reunion. Embracing the theme of family, Admiral Picard took action to secure the fate of his USS Enterprise family, as well as his own son, with Dr. Beverly Crusher, Gates McFadden, Jack Crusher, Ed Spaliers. Captain Worf, Michael Dorn, fit right in as a wise mentor to Commander Raffi Musiker. Captain Will Riker, Jonathan Frakes, Counselor Deanna Troi, Marina Sirtis, and Data, Brent Spiner, were all back. The USS Enterprise D itself even returned, courtesy of Commodore Geordi LaForge, LeVar Burton, as the last piece of the Star Trek The Next Generation puzzle. In recent years, the Star Trek franchise has expanded its universe with modern shows that have both revived the franchise and invited a range of criticisms. Interestingly, two of these modern series, Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Strange New Worlds, faced similar critiques from fans, but ultimately took opposite approaches in addressing them. These shows have navigated the delicate balance between innovation and tradition, offering a fascinating case study in how creative decisions can diverge when responding to the same kind of feedback. The criticism, too dark, too different, both Discovery and Strange New Worlds came under fire for their perceived departure from what some fans consider to be the core of Star Trek. Its optimistic vision of the future, its episodic storytelling, and its intellectual approach to conflict resolution. In particular, Discovery faced backlash for its darker tone, serialized narrative, and high-stakes drama that often felt more like a high-octane action show than a thoughtful exploration of humanity's future. The criticism boiled down to this: Discovery was too different from the classic Star Trek format. Similarly, when Strange New Worlds was first announced, there were concerns about whether it would follow in Discovery's footsteps and deviate too far from what made Star Trek beloved in the first place. Fans worried that the show might be overly serialized, driven by spectacle rather than substance, and dominated by intense interpersonal drama rather than the more diplomatic and philosophical themes of earlier Trek. In essence, both shows were accused of moving too far away from the foundational elements of Star Trek. Yet, while the criticisms were similar, the solutions offered by each series could not have been more different. Discovery, doubling down on change. Star Trek Discovery, which debuted in 2017, arrived with the ambitious goal of modernizing Star Trek for a new generation. The series leaned heavily into serialized storytelling, which was a significant shift from the episodic nature of most previous Trek series. From the outset, Discovery immersed itself in a multi-season arc with dramatic stakes, complex character dynamics, and plot lines that spanned entire seasons. This choice made Discovery feel more in line with modern prestige television, where long-running stories and intense drama dominate the landscape. However, this approach wasn't universally well received. Longtime fans of Star Trek were accustomed to the franchise's hopeful and episodic structure. They missed the more intellectual, episodic adventures of classic Trek series like The Next Generation, where moral dilemmas and exploration took center stage, rather than the large-scale galactic conflicts and personal traumas that Discovery often highlighted. Rather than backing away from its bold choices in the face of this criticism, Discovery doubled down. The show leaned even further into its unique identity by pushing the boundaries of the Star Trek universe. It introduced time travel, alternate dimensions, and complex, morally ambiguous characters that continued to shift the tone. Its fourth season even launched the crew 900 years into the future, further severing ties with the familiar timeline of the Federation. In many ways, Discovery's solution to fan criticism was to evolve even further. It embraced the idea that it was a new kind of Star Trek show designed for modern sensibilities and a different kind of viewer. While it did incorporate elements of classic Trek such as exploration and ethical dilemmas, it reframed these themes within its serialized, high-stakes framework. This approach allowed Discovery to carve out its own niche within the franchise, unapologetically distinct from its predecessors. Strange New Worlds, a return to tradition. In contrast, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which premiered in 2022, took the opposite approach when facing similar concerns about tone and structure. While fans were initially worried that it might follow the more serialized, action-driven format of Discovery, Strange New Worlds leaned into the very aspects of Star Trek that many felt were missing from modern iterations. Instead of continuing Discovery's serialized storytelling, Strange New Worlds made the deliberate choice to return to episodic storytelling. Each episode functioned as a self-contained adventure, reminiscent of the original series and The Next Generation. Captain Pike's crew aboard the USS Enterprise encounters new planets, species, and moral dilemmas in a manner that directly channels the spirit of Star Trek's optimistic exploration of the unknown. Moreover, while Strange New Worlds didn't shy away from character development or emotional depth, it reintroduced the lighter tone and sense of hope that many fans had missed. It brought back the adventure and optimism that had defined the franchise for decades. The show struck a balance between the modern production values and diverse casting of Discovery, but with an intentional homage to Trek's roots.